Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Jagdtiger. This is a 15mm or 1/100th scale plastic model made by Zvezda, and it's intended for their game Art of Tactic, but you could use it for any game you like really, as long as a Jagdtiger is an appropriate unit for that game, obviously. The back of the box is about what I would expect of Zvezda's offerings in this scale. There are pictures at 3 angles of the finished but unpainted model. I like this. It's not giving you unrealistic expectations of how the model should look when it's built. This is what you get. The box also tells us how many parts there are and the length of the vehicle, 10.7 centimeters, among other things. Boxes are cool, but have you ever seen what's inside? No? I'll show you. As you may expect, the contents of this box are relatively simple. You get 2 sprues that contain exactly enough parts to build the model. There are no options or pieces of stowage or anything like that. That's fine and not at all surprising, this is after all a cheap vehicle kit. The important stuff is all here though, and it's quite crisp and neatly moulded. I couldn't find any defects or errors and I could barely find any mould lines. What I do see though are a lot of the pins and sockets that allow the kit to be snapped together. For what it is, the detail is fairly good and there's quite a lot of it. Obviously some of it has been simplified or just omitted, but if you're looking for super detailed models you probably aren't going to find them in this scale and especially not from Zvezda. That's not intended as a slight against Zvezda of course, just that these are clearly gaming pieces. You'll also find this leaflet in the box. On one side it's got the assembly instructions or the assembling scheme as it's labelled, and on the other side there's some information about Zvezda's game Art of Tactic in Russian, English and German. Very good, let's begin. This is of course a snap kit, so you don't need to, but I'm using glue, Tamiya extra thin to be precise. I can't think of a reason I'd want to disassemble this model later, so I glue it together. First, I take this spiny, framey part and join it to the hull bottom. It should go on this way with the angled pin facing down and towards the rear of the hull, the front being the part with the angled plate. Next come the hull side parts. These easily slot into the mounting pins on the framey bit. You might need to apply a bit of pressure here, especially at the front where the final drive meets the lower front plate. Gluing this kit together will definitely help minimize gaps where parts held together by only friction would end up very gappy. It should result in a better looking model. Then it seems like a good time to assemble the casemate. Like with the lower hull, there's a central spine part that everything else can join onto. At first I wasn't entirely sure which way this should go up, but squinting at the instructions led me to believe that the little protrusion in the middle there should bend upwards. Then it's just a matter of adding the roof and front and rear plates. The pins make it so that you can't put the roof on backwards or sideways, which is good. At this point we only need to add the front, roof and rear. The sides of the casemate are part of the hull sides. There were some minor gaps where the front and rear plates join the roof, but it wasn't anything a little bit of glue and some pressure couldn't fix. Moving on, it's time to add these things to the hull. The 2 bars are internal support structures. These should go on with the pins on the ends angled upwards. The fit is a little bit tight, so you might need to press down pretty hard. Also, there are some helpful rectangular recesses which help you get these on nice and straight. Obviously this is kind of important. If they were lopsided, the hull sides wouldn't fit properly, and nobody likes improperly fitting hull sides. Next, I add this platey bit with the rear mudguards. Not really a whole lot to say about that, it slots into place very easily. Interesting way to add rear mudguards. After that, it's time for the tracks. These do have significant mould lines, but I only bothered cleaning up the areas that would be visible. The side skirts are going to hide quite a lot of this. Because the tracks are a single part, they're very easy to install. Just slot the pins into the holes on the back of the track part. I apply a bit of pressure to make sure they're pressed all the way onto the axles, and that's about all there is to it. Next comes the hull rear. There are 2 pins for this to slot onto. I did have a little trouble getting this part in at first, but once you figure out the angle to slide it in from, it's not too hard at all. Once the part is pressed firmly into place, I add glue. Then the jack mounts into these 2 small holes on the rear plate. I wasn't totally sure I'd mounted this the correct way up. The jack part is angled, so the other way would have it sitting at a downward angle, so this is probably fine. Now it's time to attach the upper hull and MG parts. This is about as simple as you would imagine, though I did have a bit of an issue at the front. It really didn't seem to want to go together. I had to be quite persuasive with the pressure. I did manage to get it together, but there was still a tiny bit of a gap. Easy enough to fix later though. There was no such issue at the rear of the hull. Installing the machine gun was pretty easy, though it also initially suffered from a bit of a gap, mostly on the left side. I took care of that by applying a bit too much glue to the joint and pressing down on the ball mount, being sure not to put my finger in the glue. The result isn't too bad, though it does look pretty strange without the sides. Once that was done, I figured I might as well attach the casemate. It's pretty easy to get the positioning with this thanks to the pins and sockets. Unfortunately, there was a bit of a gap between the hull and both the front and rear plates. You may guess that the way I'm going to say to deal with this is with pressure, but I'm not. Ha! I mean, yeah, you're right. Sorry for lying. Some glue and pressure fixes this quite nicely. Next, I assemble the main gun. The parts for this are nice, though the end of the barrel is flat, so I drilled that out. This is pretty easy, though you do have to be careful with a gun this small, even though it is actually quite a big gun in reality. There's not much room to correct mistakes, and a hole too far off center could be disastrous. When the drilling is done, I press the gun into the mantlet. There's a little notch into which the rectangular thing on the top of the gun will slot. The fit is tight, obviously, so that it stays there without glue. I add glue to the bottom of the gun where it shouldn't be seen, and it seeps all the way around the joint. Then I apply pressure to deal with that little gap. Next, I glue this little ball thingy into the rear of the gun, making sure that it's pressed all the way into the socket. This is what will hold the gun in place, so it'll be pretty hard to mount the gun without it. After I've left the gun to sit for a while so the glue can set properly, I install it. This is a simple matter of slotting it in through the front of the casemate. Through the still open sides you can see the little parts that clamp the ball into place. These parts don't clamp the ball very tightly though, so the fit is a bit loose and the gun will very easily come out of place. So I add glue, though it's a little bit tricky to get the brush in there. I wiggle the part around to make sure the glue is spread out, and I set the gun at the elevation I want it. Then it's time to put the sides on. I would suggest waiting long enough for the gun to bond into place properly to save accidentally knocking it while trying to install the whole sides. Putting the side parts on is pretty easy. I applied glue only in the center to start with, just because I was sure there was going to be some fit issues that would be made permanent if the glue was involved. The middle part went together fine, though some gap nullifying pressure was needed, and it turned out I was right to not add glue all the way around to start with. The whole rear wasn't too bad, but the front was significantly gappy, though it was easy enough to deal with. There were gaps on most of the corners of the casemate too. I did the same add glue and pressure trick all the way around. It took a bit of time, but I figure it was worth it to make the model look better, and to save myself from having to do some green stuff work later. That said, the joints aren't perfect. They are better though. And that's the Jagdtiger in 15mm scale by Zvezda complete. It's a good little giant. I thought I had a Battlefront Jagdtiger with which to compare this model, but it turns out that I don't. It's kind of hard to keep track of things when you're old and crap like I am. Oh well. I think this model is very nice. Sure, it's not super detailed, but it doesn't need to be, particularly at the low price you pay for these. That said, I do think it's actually quite well detailed for a 15mm scale model. Models in such small scales often have things omitted because they'd be too small to mold easily, or they'd just break the first time you breathed on them. I'm sure most of you are aware of that anyway. Surely nobody expects an exact duplication of the real thing for a few dollars. The whole point of these kits is cheap gaming pieces, and they do that very, very well. I give them bonus points for also looking quite good while doing so. What matters, I suppose, is that all of the important things are present. There's all kinds of tools and cables and such that would make for a lot of interest when the model is painted. The cables and things like that aren't quite as pronounced and chunky as they would be on a Battlefront model, for example, but they are a bit more realistic, at least in my opinion. They're a bit more like what the Plastic Soldier Company might do. This does make them slightly harder to paint, but that shouldn't be an issue, really. Obviously, whether or not those details being finer or more chunky is a good thing is down to personal preference, and I'm fine with both style model. The build was very quick and easy, as you might expect. If you wanted, you could build yourself a fleet of Jagdtigers in an afternoon. It's a simple enough build that you could probably do it without the instructions. But they're easy enough to follow and understand, and it's good that they are there. The pins are also quite helpful to let you know which way around parts should go. The pins and frame parts probably also give the model quite a bit of extra strength, though I would still advise against throwing it around. To conclude, I think this is a pretty good kit, and if you're looking for a 15mm scale Jagdtiger, you could certainly do worse. I think it should look very nice once it's painted. Before I paint this one, I might actually buy a few more of these. I'm not sure how many Jagdtigers you can take in Flames of War. You probably don't need too many, but I'd like to have more than one. Anyway, what do you think? Have you built this kit? Do you prefer some other Jagdtiger? Or do you prefer no Jagdtiger at all? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you haven't already, why not sub here on YouTube, follow me on social media, or watch me stream on Twitch. And if you really like what I do, please consider supporting over on Patreon or perhaps purchasing a shirt or mug from my merch store. Links to all of those things are in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other and thanks for watching. Farewell.